All right. So, the Senate passed that military spending bill with the anti trans provision intact, which sucks, but we'll see what Joe Biden does. On the one hand, he loves the military. On the other hand, he's promised to veto any legislation that could hurt the LGBT plus community. So we'll see which wins out. All right. The Senate has voted 85 to 14 to pass the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, an $895.2 billion military bill containing a provision to restrict gender-affirming care for trans children covered by TRICARE, the military's medical insurance. Lesbian Senator Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat from Wisconsin, who unsuccessfully tried to get the provision removed, said that the Republicans had broken and poisoned the final bill with the provision. Okay, two things. Number one, the fact that only 14 people voted against, when I had read that I think 44 senators plus Tammy Baldwin were speaking out against this provision, tells me that 30 of those senators didn't see that as a deal breaker, which sucks. Secondly, I realize that this is LGBTQ nation, but why do you always have to point out that somebody is a lesbian or trans or whatever? It's sort of like, pointing out that someone is white or someone is black. If it's not relevant to the situation, why bother? I mean, she didn't speak out against this provision because she's a lesbian. She spoke out against this measure because it was the right thing to do. So, yeah, that's rather annoying that they're always trumpeting, who happens to be a member of the LGBT plus community, even when it has no relevance to anything. Anyway, moving on. The NDAA contains a provision banning any medical treatment for gender dysphoria that could result in sterilization for those under 18. It's unclear if the current legislation would ban puberty blockers, which don't affect fertility, hormone replacement therapies, which can, or mastectomies, which are rarely ever performed on minors. Okay. Now, first off, someone pointed out in the comments that we should be against, why is it bad that children are choosing to sterilize themselves? Number one, just because this provision says that doesn't mean that that's what they're really concerned about. Because if they were, they would actually care about the facts. No, these people don't care about facts. They just want to pearl clutch and scare people into thinking something's happening that isn't. And then there is the fact that even if it were to cause sterilization, even if a treatment that was chosen causes sterilization, why are we hung up on whether someone will be able to make babies? I knew when I was a teenager, I didn't want kids. I'm 53 years old. I still, I don't regret not having kids. I never wanted kids, and this has never changed. So many of these kids might be told, okay, this could affect your fertility, and a lot of them will be like, fine. My mental health is more important to whether I can have biological children. Whether it be that they are going to freeze their eggs or their sperm, or whether they're going to choose adoption later. Just because something might sterilize someone doesn't make it bad. It just means that they're making a choice you wouldn't make. If fertility is that important to you, great. Ensure that you don't do anything that'll affect your fertility. Not everybody thinks that way. So even if these treatments did sterilize someone, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because not everybody values fertility. And when you say, well, why is it bad to have kids, to stop kids from choosing to sterilize themselves, you're basically saying that children obviously want to have kids when they get older, so let's prioritize that over mental health. No, that's not how this works. And if you prioritize that over your mental health, great, you do that. Not everybody does. Some people, they might want to have kids later down the road, which is why you freeze the eggs, you donate sperm, you take measures in case you do end up infertile. There are ways around the fertility problem, even if these treatments affected that. But whenever someone says, well, voluntary sterilization is bad, forced sterilization is bad, voluntary, not so much. Because, again, people generally know, especially since we're talking about kids who are teenagers, they generally know whether they want to have kids. And again, there are options for if infertility happens. So I don't see where the problem lies. And that's if this was a good faith argument, but it's not. The people who are calling these treatments voluntary sterilization are actually telling you where their priorities lie. They're saying that they care more about people having kids rather than being happy, fulfilled individuals. So this isn't even a good faith argument. I'm not talking about necessarily the comments I get. Some of these are just people who are confused. But, so there's that. Now, puberty blockers don't affect fertility. Okay, shouldn't even be talked about then, but because this is bad faith arguments, these politicians want to tell doctors what they can and cannot use to treat a certain condition. In this case, gender dysphoria. So, whether this causes sterilization or not, instead of having politicians decide what the best course of treatment is, because most of them are not doctors, There are a few in Congress who are, but I'm not sure that that their specialty is gender identity. This is a medical decision, so they should just leave it to people who actually know what the hell they're talking about. Hormone replacement therapies. Again, they can lead to fertility issues, which is again why there are options to save your sperm, freeze your eggs, so in case you want to get pregnant or get someone else pregnant later on in your journey, you still have that option. Because I do know that it's not the minute you're on hormone replacement therapies, you can't, you're infertile. It depends on how long you're on those therapies. So, yeah, I just don't see how again, that should not be anybody else's issue except for the minor and their doctor, because there are ways around this, like I've mentioned, and just because politicians can't think of ways around it doesn't mean there aren't, and that just shows that they should have nothing to do with this situation because they don't know what they're talking about. And they keep mentioning mastectomies. Now, mastectomies are removal of the breast, which has absolutely nothing to do with fertility. Unless they mean hysterectomies. Because this was in previous articles as well. I don't know, are they referring to hysterectomies? Which, again, rarely ever performed on minors because there's generally no reason to. Unless the endometriosis is just killer. But that would be for trans or cis girls because, again, endometriosis seriously sucks. So there are reasons to do it, but generally, even if we're talking about trans men, it's not, there's no reason to do it when you're a child. Because unless it's really bothersome, which, like I said, endometriosis level bothersome, there is no reason to do it. You can easily wait till you're 18. So, yes, it is horribly annoying, but periods are annoying. But if you're on puberty blockers, you aren't getting your period anyway. So, again, nothing to worry about. But yeah, it's very weird that they keep mentioning mastectomies. So, whoever wrote this article totally doesn't know the difference between a hysterectomy and a mastectomy. Or they think that something is happening by removal of the breast that, again, is biologically unsound. All right. The bill will now head to President Joe Biden to be signed into law. Biden has previously pledged to veto any legislation that harms the LGBTQ+ community, but the NDAA is traditionally considered a must-pass bipartisan bill that typically becomes law without much opposition. That tradition has changed in recent years as House Republicans have inserted culture war items into the NDAA meant to combat wokeness in the military. Last year, Republicans tried to remove any gender-affirming care coverage for trans troops, ban any book that has pornographic materials, and eliminate any offices overseeing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. All of the anti-LGBTQ plus provisions were removed from last year's bill, which is why this is very disheartening that it's staying in. I don't know if people are thinking, well, it's not that many kids that are affected. Well, that could be used as an argument for, because, okay, there aren't that many kids affected, so what's the harm in including this provision if it only affects like 1 or 2 kids? That is still 1 or 2 kids that are getting the help they need. And it's also 1 or 2 service members who might potentially not leave the service because their kids can't get the proper health care. All right. This year, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, inserted the gender-affirming care provision into the NDAA, turning some congressional Democrats against it. Yesterday, Senator Baldwin debated alongside 3 other Democratic senators to get the provision removed. Baldwin also introduced an amendment to eliminate the provision. 20 other Democratic senators supported her amendment, but it failed to pass. In a statement, Baldwin argued that lawmakers committed to U.S. service members have been broken, and noted that the provisions will affect between 6,000 and 7,000 military families. It has been broken because some Republicans decided that gutting the rights of our service members to score cheap political points was more worthy, she said before the Senate vote. We're talking about parents who are serving our country in uniform, having the right to consult their family's doctor and get the health care they want and need for their transgender children. That's it. Some folks poisoned this bill and turned their backs on those in service and the people that we represent, she added. Which is the way a lot of Republicans treat pretty much any culture war issue, is that they'll agree with any issue as long as it affects them. If it's something that doesn't affect them, or they think that they can, score one over on Democrats or whatever, own the libs, they're willing to do that, because this party has long since not become a party that's actually interested in legislating. Their whole role is to make sure Democrats can't. Anyway, last week the House passed the NDAA in a 281 to 140 vote. Representative Chris Pappas, a Democrat from New Hampshire, was among the 81 Democrats who supported the bill and was the only out-gay House member to do so. Pappas said he supported the bill because it contains pay raises for junior service members and Pentagon child care workers, addresses staffing shortages at Veterans Affairs centers in rural areas, and funds projects that generate $1.5 billion to his home state of New Hampshire. And that, there you have it, the main reason why he's supported the bill, because of the money that's coming to his home state. Now, I'm not going to say that that makes him a horrible person, because it's understandable. However, it does leave a bad taste in your mouth. And I mean, we don't know if this is weighing on him, if he feels bad that this is what the bill does to trans kids, or if he just simply doesn't care. We don't know. We just know that he's being a politician and he's getting money for his state, so he's going to vote for the bill. Pappas wrote that he remains incredibly frustrated that this process was politicized in the worst way, and blamed House Speaker Johnson for adding unnecessary riders to limit care for some LGBTQ plus individuals. So he does hate that measure. Okay, good to know. Johnson may have allowed the TRICARE restrictions into the bill to buffet conservative support for the upcoming 2025 vote to keep him as House Speaker, which is eminently possible. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him at all. In a statement condemning the Senate's vote, Human Rights Campaign President Kelly Robinson wrote, "A majority in the Senate failed military families today, thousands of whom now face the possibility of losing access to medically necessary care. President Biden has the power to put a stop to this cruelty. He should make good on his promise to protect LGBTQ plus Americans, defend military service members and their families, and ensure this country's politics reflect the best of who we are. President Biden must veto this bill." In a separate statement, Advocates for Trans Equality's Director of Federal Policy, Olivia Hunt, wrote, "Denying life-saving, medically necessary care to trans members of military families creates profound hardships, forcing service members to make impossible choices between their duty and the health and well-being of their loved ones. Politicizing access to evidence-based health care undermines the principles of fairness, dignity, and respect that our nation aspires to. No one should have to choose between their duty and protecting their family." And I have had mentioned in a previous article that there are service members who are seriously considering leaving the military for this very reason. Including this discriminatory provision in what has historically been bipartisan legislation is a disgraceful move by anti-trans politicians pandering to a fringe segment of their base. This decision prioritizes political gamesmanship over the dignity, rights, and well-being of those who serve our nation, and set a dangerous precedent of governmental overreach into decisions that should remain between doctors and families. And that's the crux of it. I honestly do not care how you feel about puberty blockers, about hormone replacement therapies. That is not for you to decide for other people. It's been medically proven to be safe and effective. Multiple medical associations and psychiatric associations have agreed that this is safe and effective. So it should be up to the person and their doctors to decide what is the best course of therapy for them. It is not up to someone who isn't aware of their situation. And that includes other trans people. Just because you went through a certain process doesn't mean it's right for others. And you will see in YouTube videos by trans people that they will mention that. This is my story. This is what I chose to do, but it won't be right for everybody, and not everybody will have the same results that I did. Because they know that it's an individual endeavor. And not everybody's situation is the same. So you can get information that, okay, this is my story, this is what happened to me. But you cannot assume that that's going to be the way things are for you. Anyway. Last week, the House passed the NDAA in a 281 to 140 vote. In addition to the trans healthcare restrictions, the bill also contained provisions blocking the Defense Department from teaching about critical race theory in its academic institutions or military trainings, which isn't happening anyway, and freezes any military hiring on positions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So basically, they don't want the military to hire black people, well, anyone who's non-white, who's LGBTQ plus, and who is a woman. Cool. And of course, trans. That goes with LGBTQ plus. It also contains a provision to expand access to in vitro fertilization services to service members whose infertility wasn't caused by service-related illnesses or injuries. So, hypocrite much? First, they're screaming at the rooftops that we have to worry about children's fertility, whether they like it or not. But if there are service members who are infertile, we're going to allow for in vitro fertilization. Okay? Yeah, that makes sense. So, cis people who are, so basically, it's true, they only care about making babies because they're worried about, they understand that there are ways around infertility issues with in vitro fertilization, but they ignore it for trans people. Because let's face it, if you say have testicular cancer, one of the options you are allowed to do before undergoing treatment is to save your sperm, to freeze your sperm. I think it's freezing. Because they know that the chances of infertility are higher, or at least reduced fertility. So that option is available. But it's a shock to people that that option is available to trans people. I don't know why this is such a shock that nobody's ever heard of freezing eggs and sperm when it comes to trans people, but seem to know it exists in other conditions. It's just so bizarre to me that this is even talked about. I mean, I just don't know. That just tells me that this isn't a serious concern. That this is just to score political points and to scare people who don't understand what it means to be trans, to scare people into thinking that this is somehow harming their kids when it's not. Anyway, that is all I have for this article. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.